Hello, my loves. Continue to update new stories on Reddit, and don't forget if you like it, please subscribe and like it. Now let's start new stories. Story: Broken Lights, a short horror story. Her breathing was wheezed. Her pacing was quick, and her focus was everywhere. Sasha's adrenaline was spiking her heart and movements in a way that shouldn't be possible. Her energy was almost endless because of it. The screams of the hostile beings running after her were loud, ear-splitting even, sounds that would render someone's throat raw if attempted to replicate. Their footsteps matched her pace, if not quicker. Feet sprinting in the grass that shuffled from theirs and her own movements. The grass surface turned to cement. Her shoes clunked against the hard surface as she ran for her life. Dodging towering metal crates and screeching monsters, her way was blocked by a looming metal warehouse. Seeing no other option, she kept her pace up for its wide-open door. Hearing one of the creatures behind her grow ever so closer, feet getting faster and louder, breathing more quickly and heavier down her neck, she dove for it. The moonlight was masked by pure darkness, her body toppling to the cement ground of indoors, her flashlight shattering on the ground. Turning to look at the open door, she threw herself up. It screamed before she threw the door closed, turning the lock. Her breathing wheezed, shuddered as she slouched forward against it, resting her forehead against the door's surface. Her breathing was so strained it was difficult to pin it between her lungs begging for air or emotions taking over, and she was on the verge of crying. Either way, she was struggling. Her legs shook in weakness, the adrenaline fading and almost begging for her to collapse. She kept herself standing, however. Looking over her shoulder, she only just now realized that the building was completely pitch black. Her mind was too originally focused on escaping with her life still intact. Diving to her knees for the flickering flashlight on the ground, she picked it up. No. No, 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 no. The glass was shattered, the lightbulb inside flickering in an attempt to stay alive. She smacked its surface onto the palm of her hand in aggressive attempts. That only seemed to make it worse. With one more firm pound of it against the palm of her hand, it died. The light dimmed before the entire building shrouded her in complete darkness. Her breathing shuddered. She was completely defenseless against the weavers. The weavers. Human hybrid creatures of complete hostility. Broad-shouldered human beings who have succumbed to their form. Clothes ripped and tattered to almost nothing but rags. Skin a sickly pale, black bags under their glowing orange hungry eyes like goggles, hands and feet completely black like they were burned, nails so long that they could reach their knees without even bending over, ears sharp and pointed, and jaws split into arthropod-like mandibles, salivating, clicking and screeching in communication. Their motivation is unknown, and so is their origin, for what she knew. But the way they treat humans is cemented and true. Angry, hostile, and deadly. Some kill on the spot, others drag them away, never to be seen again. She was pursued by 3 of them in that chase. From the glance she got over her shoulder, 2 were male, and the other was female, easily distinguishable by their appearance and host. The people at the safe house told her it was a bad idea to go out by herself. "Sasha, you'll get yourself killed." She took it anyway. Sasha lifted her head, staring into the empty black void of the warehouse before her. Adjusting her black long hair, she reached into her pocket, pulling out her phone. She opened up the camera and pointed her phone to the darkness before her. With a press of her thumb, the camera flashed. With the camera flash, the terrain was revealed to her for only a second. Towering metal shelving units with wooden crates. She hated that she could only see for a split second. She hated the dark. She doesn't fear it itself. She fears what might be hiding inside it. She fears that something would just jump out at her the moment she presses that camera button. Despite the fear growing inside of her, she pressed on. She slowly stepped further into the darkness to accomplish her quest that she started the moment she stepped out of the safe house. To find her 2 missing kids. It has been hours since she has last seen them since this whole problem began. A part of Sasha wanted to look for a light switch, but in reality, that would be fruitless. The town is devoid of any power. The power plant was ambushed by the weavers, the phone tower was attacked and the radio tower's cords were cut. The town is stuck in a blackout. No lights, no power, no communication to the outside world. They were isolated, and the world was completely ignorant of what this town is currently going through. Pressing the camera button on her phone again, it flashed, exposing her path for another second. She was slowly treading down a narrow hallway of towering metal shelving units. But in the end, it was hard to tell where she was going since all she could see was just a wall of darkness in her path. She pressed it again, and her heart stopped for a second. Laying on the cement ground before her in that second-long flash was a pink ribbon. She dove to her knees, shock overcoming her as she gently scooped up the pink, glistening ribbon. Her breathing shook as did her arms as she lifted the light little ribbon in her hands. Her daughter's ribbon. A ribbon fixed into a bow in the back of her head to make her hair ponytail, and here it was, laying on the ground and now clutched in her mother's hands. Lifting her head, looking forward, her heart stopped again. A shoe. A blue sneaker. Her son's sneaker. Sasha felt like she could cry. She buried her face into her daughter's ribbon, weeping for them. She could just imagine the situation they were in. Her daughter holding her brother's hand, leading him away, running, screaming, their young child's shrieks echoing in the warehouse before being caught by these monsters. She expected the worst to happen to them, and the thought would not go away. It brought tears to her eyes, water falling down her face as she sobbed into the tattered pink bow in her hands. A small part of her had a glimmer of hope. Maybe they were dropped in their escape. Maybe her bow wasn't fixed tightly to her head and unraveled off. Maybe her son's shoe slipped off during the run to safety. A choked breath jumped out of her as she lifted her head from the ribbon. Okay, she regained what little composure was left. Stay focused. With the mindset that they have escaped, she pressed on. She shambled through the darkness, occasionally pressing the camera on her phone to illuminate her way for a second. She stepped into a small opening, or at least it felt like she did. The thick air suddenly got thinner and it felt more open. Sasha shuffled forward through the dark, treading through a blanket of nothing. Her foot slipped on something wet. Her leg was thrown forward. Sasha gasped, toppling backwards. She crashed to the cement floor, the breath being knocked out of her. A groan growled from her throat as she sat up. She stared ahead to make out anything that she stepped on, but it was near impossible. Sitting up and shuffling to her knees, she lifted her phone to the floor, pointing the camera at it. With the press of a button, the camera flashed. Sasha's blood ran cold. Gore. Remnants of something tainted the floor before her. A pile of mutilated flesh, bone, and blood, rendering its shape completely unknown. Sasha flashed the light again. As if the first glance wasn't already sickening enough, the second one bore more answers. There were no traces of clothing in the fleshy mess. Instead, remnants of torn and ripped fur, which could mean it was an animal. An animal, sure, but as for what kind was completely beyond her. It was too messy, mangled, and bloody to tell. Movement caught her attention in front of her. Sasha's breathing spiked as she lifted her chin. For the time she has been in the dark warehouse, her eyes seemed to have adjusted ever so slightly. In her vision, she could make out two shelving units side by side. One of them shook. Sasha's breathing shuddered as she stood up. She stared at the wall of darkness in front of her. A low, gurgling, croaking noise filled the dead silence in the warehouse. Sasha slowly lifted her phone, pointing it at the darkness before her. Her arm shuddered as she did. A whimper came out of her as she bit the bottom of her lip. She pressed the camera button on her phone. The camera flashed. The weaver shrieked. Sasha screamed, the male creature shielding its eyes from the blinding flash of the camera light. Her feet reacted, attempting to back her away from the hostile creature. The humanoid creature strained a scream back, pouncing from its narrow space between shelving units onto her. She was forced to the ground as it straddled on top of her. Sasha struggled as the creature pinned her to the floor. A shriek left its throat and passed the 4 large mandibles of teeth in its mouth. She threw her arms into directions, but it kept a firm grip on them to keep her still. Its alive eyes narrowed inside the black bags under them as a strained noise left its throat, its salivating tongue flinging out of its mouth for a quick moment. It lurched its head forward. A blood-curdling scream echoed throughout the warehouse from the poor victim as the sharp teeth punctured the flesh of her neck. Story, Gray Face. Tick, 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 the sound of the clock ticking ran through the detention room. The room was dead silent, only filled with one other student and myself. The other student was sitting on the other side of the room, not paying any attention to me or their surroundings. I would take a nap to save myself from this purgatory, but the constant ticking of the clock ran through my brain like an alarm clock. Tick. 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 I considered making conversation with the other student, but they didn't seem like much for conversation. They seemed around my age, 16 or 17, their short brown hair sat on their shoulders. The way they dressed and presented themselves made them look like your average innocent girl, but then we made eye contact. Her eyes were light blue, but they might as well have been scarlet red. They had a sort of fierceness in them that would make anyone shiver. I could feel her judgment crawl down my spine. I quickly turned away, not wanting to poke the beast anymore. I started to think about how I ended up here. I don't even remember, in all honesty, everything is kind of a blur. I know it was in the hallway, everything was normal, and then it was all red. I remember the rage, the hatred, and anger flowing through my body, any humanity in me drained away as I became a savage husk of anger. I think I hurt someone, but I can't remember. I don't think I want to. Finally, the teacher walked in to save me from myself. He was a tall man with a stern face. You could tell he's been dealing with troublemakers for a while, and he wasn't going to crack. His voice was deep and imposing. "You know why you're here," he said. "You're here because the school needs to punish you while they figure out if you're worth expelling or not." Expelled? I thought to myself. What had I done that set me up for expulsion? I could feel the memory trying to escape, but was unable to reach the surface. The teacher once again spoke. "You'll be here for a few hours. Exits are magnetically locked, with the main office being able to unlock them once your time is up. Your phones are in the office as well. You'll receive them once detention is over." The student next to me raised her hand. "Yes, Laura?" said the teacher, obviously annoyed. "How long do we have to do this for?" said the girl, presumably named Laura. "You both will be here until the school expels you or lets you off," said the teacher. However, for some people, the teacher looked over at me, expulsion is more likely. I lowered my head in shame. I don't even know what I did, and here I am being reprimanded for it. It happened this morning, only a few hours ago, so why can't I remember? Whatever I did wrong, it's going to cost me a lot. First I had to wait after school until 6, and now I have detention until 9. Now I'm being told I could be expelled. I raised my head once I felt that the teacher's disappointing glaze had left. "So make yourself comfortable," said the teacher. "I'm going to be right back. I need to grab something from my car. Once I'm back, it's going to be 3 hours of silence." The teacher walked out and closed the door behind him. The second the door closed, the girl next to me laid back in her chair. After a few minutes of silence, she finally turned to me. "What did you do?" she said. "Huh?" I responded. "What did you do? What did you do to get here?" I turned to her, her fierce eyes piercing through my soul. I don't know," I responded meekly. "You don't know? What do you mean you don't know?" She sounded annoyed, like my answer offended her somehow. I heard a rumor about you," she said. "I heard they are holding you here because they are waiting for the police to figure out what to do." I looked at her, hoping to see that she was joking, but the intensity in her eyes said otherwise. "I also heard about what you did." Her eyes turned from fierce to straight-up hatred. "And if it's true you're lucky I don't bash your head against a wall for what you did." With this comment, I stood up. "I'm going to find the teacher," I said. "The teacher won't save you from responsibility," said Laura. I turned away from her and began to exit the room when she let out one more remark. "You know, it's ironic, you didn't want to lose your friends to her. Yet you lost them anyway." I closed the door behind me. I felt sickened. Those weren't just empty threats. Those were real. I began walking towards the entrance of the school, letting what Laura said sink in. I didn't want to lose my friends to her? Who was her? Suddenly a memory unlocked, my brain finally allowing me to slightly remember what it was forcing me to forget. Bethany, her name was Bethany. Bethany is a new girl at our school, and she is perfect. Super nice, super smart, and the sweetest little thing. She had recently integrated into my little friend group. Everyone in the group basically showered her in attention, but that wasn't a problem for me. She's just a new part of the gang, and I don't have anything against her. I wouldn't hurt Bethany, she's my friend. I wouldn't. All these thoughts stopped once I reached the entrance. The front entrance was in ruins. The ceiling had been torn down with rubble, blocking the entrance entirely. There was no way to access it, and even if you could squeeze through you would risk the whole mess collapsing on you. And then there was the body. My teacher was lying on the floor. His body was mangled to the point you could barely recognize him. His face was practically torn off. His blood and entrails spread across the floor and walls. The smell hit the hardest. It was the most disgusting thing I had ever smelled in my entire life. I stood there for a while, not knowing what to do. How did this happen? Who had done this? Then I heard the stomping. I began to run back to the classroom as the stomping behind me only got louder. I didn't know if it was behind me or not, but I didn't want to find out. Whatever was there let out an unholy noise. It sounded like it was screeching while inhaling. The noise pierced my skull as I continued to run in horror. I reached the detention classroom and ran inside, closing the door behind me. The room was empty, Laura was nowhere to be seen. Whatever got the teacher must have gotten her too. But what was it? The thumps got louder and louder with the screeching continuing at random intervals. Suddenly the shadow of the creature passed by the window of the classroom. I couldn't see much of it, but I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't human. I waited for what seemed like an eternity until I felt as though the monster was gone. I opened the door slowly and peered out. The hallway was no longer lit up, the lights were completely smashed, all I could make out was the outlines of the classroom doors and lockers. I took a deep breath and stepped out, trying to be as silent as possible. My best move was to get to the office. The controls for the magnetic locks were in there, and so was my phone. I could call for help and unlock the magnetic doors, letting me leave. Plus, the office faculty may still be in there and could be oblivious to the monster roaming around. The least I could do is try to warn them. I started to make my way through the hallway, trying not to make a sound. I was on the first floor and I knew the office was on the second. I just had to make it up the stairs without running into that thing again. I made my way through the halls quietly and paranoid. I had never felt so much fear in my entire life. Each second felt hours long, and I knew I could easily be found at any moment. I felt alone. Everyone I trusted wasn't with me anymore. All my friends were busy with their own lives, so I was left to face the darkness alone. I felt like I had no one by my side. No one to trust. No one to lean on. I was all on my own. But yet they all paid attention to Bethany. They all talked to Bethany, they all hung out with Bethany. Why were my friends there for her? Why weren't they there for me? I suddenly snapped out of my trance. What were those feelings? Why am I thinking about Bethany and my friends right now? They have nothing to do with this. I felt alone at the moment as I was locked in a school with a monster, but that was something different. That was a memory. That's how I felt. What had I done? Before I could remember anything else, I saw it. It was staring in front of me at the other end of the hall. It was at least 3 times my height. It had a large skull-like face. Its arms were long and its hands were huge, each with incredibly long and skinny fingers. Its legs were large as well, with backward knees and large deformed feet. His entire body was malnourished with his skin tight around his bones. You could see its rib cage and you could see it breathing. Its eyes and mouths were hollow, with only a faint red light in its eyes. We stared at each other for what seemed like hours, both equally fascinated in the other. It then started to raise its hand. It slowly extended its arm and finger, pointing at me with no expression on its face. Then it let out a screech. And then it started to move. I ran in the opposite direction of the hallway, trying to reach the other staircase behind me. I could hear the creature screeching and stomping forward. I turned around at one point to see it. Its hands were in front of it like a T-Rex, and it was stomping forward at incredible speed. Adrenaline rushed through my body as I pushed myself to reach the staircase. I ran up the stairs as the creature continued to howl behind me. I reached the second floor with the office in reach. Suddenly a hand grabbed me and pulled me into a classroom. I tried to scream, but a hand covered my mouth. It was Laura. She motioned me to be quiet by putting her finger on her lip. Outside we heard the monster pass, still letting out its horrific screeches. Once the noises had faded, Laura removed her hand from my mouth and began to talk. "You're lucky I even saved you after what you did," said Laura. "I don't know what you're talking about," I responded. "I didn't do anything to Bethany, I didn't hurt her." Laura turned to me with an angry look in her eyes. "Funny you should say that," she said intensely, "because I never mentioned Bethany." My eyes widened as I realized my slip-up. "You know what you did," said Laura. "You just don't want to remember." With that, something snapped within me. "Shut up!" I screamed as I knocked Laura to the ground. She stood up and punched me in the jaw, knocking me to the floor. "Admit to what you did," she screamed, hitting me again as I lay on the floor. "Admit it. You know what you did, admit it." Suddenly the hand of the creature burst through the classroom door. Both of us jumped back in fear. The creature howled its horrific screech as it clawed its way through the door and into the classroom. It stood tall, still letting out its hollow screech. Laura was quick to act, picking up a nearby textbook and charging at the monster. She swung the textbook at the creature and hit it square in the jaw. The creature stumbled back and crashed into the wall, letting out a screech of pain. Laura ran back to me and grabbed my arm, pulling me up. Just as we were about to leave the classroom, however, the creature's hand launched forward and grabbed Laura. She screamed in fear as the creature tried to pull her away. I grabbed on to Laura's arm, refusing to let her go. The creature, however, was stronger and grabbed Laura with its other hand. With Laura screaming in fear and pain, I watched as her arm slowly began to tear, before coming off completely in my hands. The blood poured out of what was once her arm, drenching the classroom in the dark red liquid. I watched in horror as the creature lifted Laura into the air, grabbing Laura's head with one hand and her feet with the other. Then, as Laura screamed in pain and absolute terror, I watched as the creature began to pull. I could hear the bones cracking, I could hear the skin ripping, all while Laura screams in agony. Finally the tension gave in and the creature with a loud howl ripped Laura in half. Her intestines sprawled out as blood and entrails began to cover the floor. Her upper half laid lifeless in the creature's hands, her expression still locked in a terrified scream. The creature, body in hand, let out a terrifying screech, and as I began to run out of the classroom and towards the office, I reached the office with the monster still screeching in the distance. I opened the door to find what I expected. The faculty were all mangled, with blood coating the walls. I ran behind the desk and first unlocked the magnetic doors. I then opened up the desk and grabbed my phone. I called 911 as I could hear the screeching getting louder. After what felt like an eternity, the line picked up. "Hello 911, what's your emergency?" "Hello. I yelled. I need help, there's a dash shot. The monster's hands burst through the ceiling above me, causing me to drop my phone as I scream in terror. I ran out of the room without even thinking. I could worry about the police later, the doors were unlocked. I had to leave. I ran through the hallway as the monster attempted to claw its way through the ceiling in the office. I was going to make it. I was going to make it. And then I saw her locker. Bethany. Bethany's locker. I tried to avoid looking at it, but I couldn't. What Laura said rang through my head. You know what you did, you just don't want to remember. I tried to push the memory away. This wasn't the time. This wasn't the place. I looked at the locker again as I heard the monster screaming in the distance. I don't care anymore. I don't care if it hurts. I don't care if I die. I don't want to forget anymore. I want to remember. I remember the morning. I remember feeling alone. All of my friends were busy with their own lives, leaving me to face my darkness alone. I was sad, I was alone, I was scared. And then I saw her. Bethany. Talking with my friends as always. I remember the jealousy. Why did they only care about her? Why were they always there for her? Why were they never there for me? I remember the rage, I remember the darkness and fear inside me taking over. I remember the happiness on her face when she saw me. I remember when that happiness turned into fear. I remember the blood as I smashed her head against the locker repeatedly. I remember the fear on my friend's face. I remember them trying to hold me back as I stomped her head in with my feet. I remember her barely breathing. I remember the ambulance taking her away. I remember being placed in the detention room until the police and faculty could figure out what to do. I remember the fear of losing my friends to her. I remember the jealousy of not being happy like her. I remember my hatred for her. I hated her. I hurt her. I almost killed her. With that memory, I stopped where I stood. I fell to my knees in tears. What had I done? I had let my jealousy, my fear of loneliness take over, and where had that gotten me? I was all alone now. No friends. No future. No hope. I could hear the monster behind me now, but I don't care. I don't deserve to live for what I've done. I deserve to die. The monster grabbed my shoulders and turned me around as it lifted me up. I stared at his hollow red eyes as tears flowed down my face. I'm sorry, Bethany. I'm sorry, everyone. I deserve this. The monster's eyes began to glow a brilliant orange. His mouth soon followed, filling with that bright brilliant light as he let out his howl. I stared at the lights, mesmerized by their brilliance. Then it went black. I woke up in a room with my hands tied to a hook on the ceiling. It seemed to be a boiler room. If it was the boiler room of the school or some other building, I did not know. The room was small, only containing a boiler and a drain on the floor. The drain was stuffed with what looked like flesh and feces. The walls around me are old and disgusting. The wallpaper peels in multiple areas. The room smelled horrible, the smell coming from the feces and rotting flesh in the drain. I looked around and saw other hooks with rotting bodies with their hands tied just like me. Suddenly in a corner, I saw it. The creature. It noticed me and slowly made its way over. I tried to move as it approached, but it was no use. The creature walked over to me and stood in front of me. I could feel its breath hitting my face. I wasn't scared to die, I wanted to die, why hadn't it killed me? Finally, I found the courage to speak. What do you want? The creature stared at me before extending its hand and caressing my face with its long fingers. Then it spoke, and its answer was more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. Friends. Story in the abyss. Head throbbing, pain shooting everywhere in my body, is this a dream, or am I dead? Taking a big breath in was painful, I could barely fill my lungs before the pain was shooting everywhere, feeling like million tiny daggers stabbing me right inside my muscles and bones. focusing on moving my fingers and toes, making sure if anything was broken. Opening my eyes at first, everything was dark, there wasn't anything to see. When my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could vaguely make out shapes or something in the dark. Taking a second to listen, to take in where I am now, it was so quiet, it felt like I could hear my thoughts. Nothing shows any sign of life. Gathering my strength to pull my right arm from its position to start pushing myself off the ground, having every muscle of my body screaming at me to stop moving, but I didn't want to just lay here to die. When I tried to use my left arm, but when I realized it was under something I couldn't make out. When I tried to pull it out, it took some strength, but I managed to get it free. Getting to my knees, looked around me, there were so many shapes in the darkness. I was in a pile of something, but I don't know what. Then something hit my nose, a horrible gross smell, as if a bag of food has been sitting out in the sun on a hot summer day. It smelled musky and horrible. I didn't even want to breathe, it was making me gag a little. Remembering I had on the jacket, I felt for the zipper to undo it, taking off the jacket to only put it on backward to use the hoodie as a mask. It cut the smell down a little, but I could at least manage. But now I didn't know what to do. I was stuck somewhere with this horrible smell and can't see hardly anything. I tried to recall how I got here, remembering where I was before this, remembering I was at a bus stop, I was going somewhere and I got a phone call. The tone was so clear in my head in this silence, as it was this ugly lame default ringtone my phone had. For some reason now I can recall and hear that tone clearly. Listening closer, I was hearing that damn ringer. It wasn't in my head, there was a phone somewhere in this darkness, meaning a source of light, and hoped to contact someone. Getting to my feet, I listened closely as the sound seemed to be echoing around the space I am in. Turning around, I could see a dim light coming from somewhere seeming far away. Without another hesitation, I forced my body to move, stepping on the shapes I was seeing and tripping constantly as I didn't know where to step, hoping whatever is causing this ringtone to go off, it didn't stop, it would stay on until I can get to it. Luck was not in my favor as the light and ringtone went off. Standing in this darkness again, I closed my eyes and prayed the ringtone would start again, my heart growing heavy as that phone could have been my one chance out of here. Feeling the hot tears swell in my eyes as I want to cry, begging for that ringtone again. Now in this silence, I took a moment to think about the shapes I was walking on, taking my left foot and moving it around until it hit something to my left, putting my foot on it. It was kind of smushy in some places, but hard in others. I didn't know what I was stepping on. As I was about to bend down to inspect whatever was under my foot, the ringtone broke the silence again. My prayers were answered without giving it a second thought. I went in the same direction, hoping it was the same phone form before. Soon the light came on, it had to be the screen, it was closer. As I got closer, I could see something was covering the screen, but it was still giving enough light to locate where it was. Still heading towards it, when the light was right at my feet, I dropped to my knees feeling for it. I felt the rectangle shape, it was a phone, feeling it was in some kind of cloth. My heart was racing and my hands were sweaty and shaking, trying to free this phone before the ringer stops again. But I couldn't find an opening grating to just the cloth. I shook it, hoping the phone dropped out of whatever it was. I didn't stop until I hear the plastic and concrete hitting together. Finally seeing the phone screen, reading it, it was an alarm that said date with Annabella at 5. The shock of waking up in this dark hellhole was starting to wipe away as I picked up the phone and I dismissed the alarm. Seeing another person's face that I don't know on this screen, I wiped down to get the toolbar. Seeing the flashlight icon, I took a breath before hitting it as the light turned on. The worst scenes for any other human being to see was happening in front of me. Where the light touched was bodies and more bodies laying on the ground, all of them lifeless. But not a single fly or bug was down here looking at these people's faces. One girl I could see had pretty red ginger hair and beautiful green eyes. Her skin looked so warm. Still, I reached out, touching her forehead. There was still a little bit of warmth in her skin. I could feel my whole body tremble. My eyes burned with tears as my throat ached. I hate crying, I hate feeling so weak, but what else can I do? I screamed at the top of my lungs. I cried so loud, wanting anyone to hear me. If there was even a chance someone could hear me, I kept screaming and screaming and screaming. Story: Pizza Delivery Ghost Horror Story. Norm, California, June 2024. I live and work in Silicon Valley. The San Francisco Bay Area is one of the cheapest places to live in the United States. That's why I work for a tech company during the day but deliver pizza at night. Until recently. After that experience, I'm now looking for a less intimidating side hustle. The night is hot and the pizzas fly quickly and noisily. I just got back from delivering 5 pizzas and it's already past 10:30. I was about to get to work when the Lord pulled me aside and said that we finally had one order left. She asked if I could receive it because the other delivery person had already gone home. She told me there would be a tip, and since I was more needy than tired, I agreed. There is only one thing worth noting. The house where I delivered was in a blighted area of East Palo Alto. If you don't know anything about the area, East Palo Alto is generally pretty sketchy. But since I needed the money, I endured it and got back in the car to go buy pizza one last time. The house I delivered to was at the end of a street with many cars. The only light in sight was out. Most of the houses on the street had front porch lights on, but not a single light was on at the house where I delivered. When I stopped the car, I looked out the windshield and double-checked that I had the correct address. This place seems abandoned. What's more, it looks like a haunted house, with upstairs front windows that look like eyes and a front door that resembles a closed mouth before it opens and eats you alive. The yard was overgrown with weeds, and there was a large tree that obscured the house. I almost said, "To hell with this," and drove away. Almost like that. But after taking a few deep breaths and regaining my composure, I dropped the pizza box, got out of the car and headed towards the house. I almost dropped it when my foot touched a cracked piece of the label, and I practically had to duck under a long branch to get to the front door. Can't find the bell, so I'm entering 3 times and waiting. I expected a flash before it came on, or some light in the house to come on, but it was still dark. I waited about a minute before entering again, this time harder. Then has nothing. I was about to turn around and leave when I heard a noise on the other side of the door. It sounded like someone was trying to find a window that couldn't be found. I thought maybe they were afraid to open the door or something, so I raised my voice and said, "Pizza delivery." I heard something that sounded like a voice, but couldn't understand what the person was saying. Then I heard someone fiddling with the lock on the other side of the door. I took a step back and waited as I pressed the start button and the door slowly opened. At first, I couldn't determine anything about the reopening person, regardless. He was an older man, perhaps 60 or 70 years old, with velvety hair and thick glasses. There was nothing unusual about him, nothing that suggested he was anything but what he seemed. However, when I looked at him, I had an uneasy feeling. I picked up the pizza box and told him I had received his order. He looked at it like it was something small that he wasn't expecting. He didn't say a word but just nodded and turned around as if he was going to get his wallet. The door closed softly and he disappeared from my sight. I waited and waited, but he didn't come back. I listened and heard nothing. I realized I hadn't heard him walk and thought maybe he was just behind the door or something. As I get richer and richer, I try to take my head out to look inside. I saw something outside in the darkness, so I decided to take gentle measures inside. I said, "Hello." But there is no answer in noise. In the end, I lost the fight so much that I opened the door and called again. I found a completely empty front apartment, without even any furniture. It was completely dark, and I couldn't see any further. I listened for another minute before a sudden feeling of fear entered me, and I slowly backed away. The house is completely empty. No noise was found. I finally had enough and turned around, almost hitting my head on a low tree branch, and almost ran to my car. I didn't look back once to see if there was any activity in the house, and I threw the pizza on the passenger seat and got the hell out of there, not sure exactly why I was so scared, but just in case. Top of your abilities. I was angry when I brought the pizza back to the restaurant. She asked me why I didn't call the number on the order to see if I was calling the wrong house, and I admitted that I hadn't even thought of that. That's my speed. She went to the phone to autodial, then put the phone down with a confused look. "It no longer works," she said. I was still worried about getting home and couldn't sleep, so I decided to look up the address online. First, my house arrived. I then looked up the address online along with the name on the order. What I found scared me to the point of exhaustion, and I called La Pizza the next day and quit my job. Turns out, the house had been abandoned for many years. The last resident of the house was a man who was questioned on suspicion that many children went missing in the area in the 80s. The article went on to say that the man committed suicide at his home. Not long after verified and resolved, let's say monitoring the alert was done, and this is how the penalty was avoided. Although police never found any evidence in the house of the crimes he was suspected of, it was almost universally assumed that he had kidnapped and killed children in the area, and that there were perhaps even more than that. I can't find any pictures of that man online, but something tells me that if there were, I would see a face like the one I found at the door of that house. I believe that what I saw was a ghost, and although the man I saw may have escaped it, he was clearly not in a state of rest. I just hope his victims still rest in peace and that they aren't trapped in that house with him either. Story: The Forgotten Shadows. Open with eerie, unsettling music and a dark, gloomy background of an old, abandoned house. Introduce the protagonist, Emily, a curious urban explorer with a passion for uncovering hidden histories. Emily hears rumors about the old Rayburn house on the outskirts of town. The locals say it's haunted, but Emily doesn't believe in ghosts. She decides to explore the house, hoping to find some interesting artifacts or hidden stories. Emily approaches the house at dusk, capturing the decaying exterior with her camera. As she steps inside, the door creaks loudly, and a chill runs down her spine. The air is thick with dust, and the floorboards groan under her weight. While exploring the main hall, Emily finds an old, dusty photo album. She flips through the pages, seeing pictures of a happy family. Suddenly, she hears footsteps behind her. She turns around, but no one is there. Her heartbeat quickens, but she dismisses it as her imagination. Emily ventures deeper into the house. She hears whispers echoing through the halls and sees shadows moving in her peripheral vision. She tries to rationalize these occurrences, but feels an increasing sense of dread. She finds a door leading to the basement. Despite her fear, curiosity drives her to descend the creaky stairs. The basement is dark and damp, filled with old furniture and broken toys. She feels a cold breath on her neck and turns around to see a ghostly figure of a little girl staring at her. The ghostly girl points to an old trunk in the corner. Emily opens it to find newspaper clippings about the Rayburn family. They reveal a tragic story of a fire that killed the entire family, except for the little girl who went missing and was never found. Emily realizes that the ghost is the missing girl, seeking closure. Emily tries to leave the basement, but the door slams shut. The whispers grow louder, and the shadows close in on her. She understands that the spirits of the house are not malevolent, they are trapped, reliving their tragic fate. She promises to help them find peace. With the ghostly girl's help, Emily finds a hidden diary in the trunk. The diary details the family's final moments and the girl's escape plan that failed. Emily takes the diary and manages to open the basement door. As she exits the house, the spirits seem to fade, finally at peace. Emily leaves the Rayburn house, vowing to tell the world their story. She publishes her findings, and the house becomes a memorial for the Rayburn family. The video ends with Emily looking back at the house, now at peace, and a message about the importance of remembering and honoring the past. Story: I visited a cult who kept their leader's body wrapped in Christmas lights and covered in glitter. I barely escaped with my life. The first time I saw Mother God, she lay in a blue sleeping bag, her face covered in glitter, her eyes missing. Someone had wrapped Christmas lights around her desiccated corpse, and now they strobed and twinkled merrily. Mother God is in stasis, a calm voice said from behind me. I turned, seeing Hope had followed me into the room. She was one of Mother God's most fanatical followers. She is taking all the poisons from the universe into her body. Soon, she will wake up and lead us towards ascension. You must hug Mother God, a deep male voice demanded. Through the shadows of the hallway, I saw Lama, a hulking mass of red hair and muscle. He held a pistol in one steady hand. She will take away your doubts and anxieties. I'm not hugging a goddamned corpse, I spat angrily, wondering how I kept getting into these bizarre situations. How come you guys didn't call a doctor when she was dying? What the hell is wrong with you people? Mother God is not dead. Llama screamed in an insane voice. How could God possibly die? And why would we call a three-dimensional doctor, anyway? Mother God is a five-dimensional being. They wouldn't even know where to start, Hope said, her eyes wide and gleaming. Llama nodded in fanatical agreement. I wondered where the rest of them were. I looked around, trying to find a way out. I knew they had my 2-year-old son downstairs, playing with the other kids who lived at the compound. If you don't hug Mother God, you will be recycled into the galactic center, Llama said, pointing the pistol in the middle of my forehead. He wore some strange combination of a shawl and a poncho, the once colorful material now dull and fraying. I could smell the sage and weed permeating his clothes. Llama looked at me with eyes the faded green color of swamp water. His long beard looked far greasier than the last time I had seen him, his skin sunken and gray. I turned, staring down at the mummified corpse. The papery flesh hung tightly to the grinning skull. The lips had been eaten away, showing yellowed, cracked teeth. The nose, too, had collapsed into the center of the face. 2 ragged sinus holes covered in dried yellowish pus and clotted blood marked the spot. The smell emanating from Mother God's desiccated body was sickening, a combination of cinnamon, feces, and rotting meat. Do it, Llama demanded, shoving the barrel of the pistol into the small of my back. A sharp stabbing pain shot up my spine as I stumbled forward. Do it, Hope repeated in her droning, emotionless voice. I looked down at the corpse sprawled across the floor. Inhaling deeply, I held my breath and lowered myself down on my knees. Mother God's grinning, half-decayed skull almost looked like it was trying not to laugh. I held my breath so as to avoid inhaling the rank odors rising from the decomposing body. Hesitantly, I leaned forward, extending my trembling hands towards Mother God. I wrapped my arms around the sleeping bag, hugging the corpse gently. I wanted to avoid releasing any more gas bubbles, as the entire room already smelled of infection and shit. Mother God's thin arms cracked like dry chicken bones. Black fluid dribbled from her mouth, reeking of sewerage and bacteria. I closed my eyes, trying not to vomit. Isn't it beautiful? Hope asked as I pushed myself up, wavering on my feet and trying not to puke. She stroked her long brown hair over and over, as if trying to calm herself down. Can't you feel all the love radiating off of her? She is the center of everything, the storehouse of compassion. I nodded, continuously swallowing all the saliva flooding my mouth to try to keep from retching in front of these insane fanatics. The smell of feces and rot seemed to have grown stronger in the room. I remembered the children on the floor below us and felt a rising sense of horror as I realized they had been living in this house with a corpse for weeks. I need to go check on Davy, I whispered, feeling my heart racing. Everything seemed unreal, as if I were trapped in a nightmare. Llama stood like a statue, the pistol pointed down by his side. His eyes were half closed, as if he were in some sort of stupor. Hope crept up behind him, putting her long fingers on his shoulder. Llama's eyes flew open as if he had just woken up. Davy is fine, he said in a robotic monotone. Everything is fine. We are one. We are one. Hope repeated excitedly. All one. Okay, I whispered slowly, looking between the two of them. I'm going downstairs then. I took a step toward the door. A moment later, I heard the floorboards creaking. I glanced back, seeing Hope and Llama following closely behind me, whispering to each other in low, conspiratorial voices. Even in the sprawling living room downstairs, the cloying smell of dead flesh followed us. I saw Davy sleeping on a beanbag next to a little girl, looking as peaceful as a tiny angel. Did you guys see Mother God? Another girl named Aurora asked. She was laying on the couch next to a smoking glass bung. She is still in stasis, Hope answered grimly, her eyes sad and downcast. She has not yet awoken to lead us into ascension. Aurora sat up, flicking a lighter and filling up the bong with thick, gray smoke. The skunky smell did nothing to cover up the reek of decaying meat, however. It seemed to combine with it into something even more nauseating and sickening than before. I had not come here for no reason, though I now regretted bringing Davy. My brother, Lee, had been missing for nearly a month. The last time I heard from him, he told me about making new friends in this laid-back compound where everyone ate mushrooms and talked about spirituality all the time. Then his phone shut off, and he seemed to just disappear. I wasn't too worried, to be honest, as Lee was a full-grown man and could take care of himself. But after 5 weeks, my mother and father begged me to try to find him and make sure he was okay. Now that I was here, I wasn't confident that he was. I wondered how to bring up the subject to these nutjobs. Hey, you guys aren't holding prisoners in the basement like some kind of Gary Heidnick horror house, are you? I'm sorry, I'm being rude, Aurora said, turning her dark eyes to me. Like Hope, her face was caked in far too much makeup and had a somewhat blocky, unattractive quality. Her nose was just slightly too big, her forehead too high, her cheekbones too bony. Other than Aurora's hair, which was dyed pink and black, she might have been twins with Hope. She raised the bong to me. You said you're friends with Lee, right? Do you want a hit? I waved my hand in front of my chest. No, I'm good, I said. Actually, Lee's my brother. He dropped off the map a few weeks ago, and my parents just wanted to make sure he wasn't dead in a ditch somewhere. I didn't realize it at that moment, but things were about to get a lot stranger than they already were in the compound. I heard a shrill keening, rising in volume. It sounded like the cries of a panicked, injured animal. It drew closer. My head ratcheted over to stare at the basement door, which flew open. A naked woman with frayed strands of thick rope still tied to her wrists exploded through the threshold. She looked scarecrow thin, and her pale, white flesh covered in deep purple bruises and angry red gashes. Help me, she cried, staring directly at me. The rest of the room went deathly silent. I heard the crying of Davy and the other children as they woke up, surprised by the sudden screaming and slamming. What are you doing out of the learning room? Llama asked in a voice seething with psychopathic coldness. She screamed and tried pushing past Llama and Hope, heading toward the door. Hope fell backwards, her eyes wide and surprised as she smacked her head hard on the dirty carpet. Llama was much faster, however. He reached for his holstered pistol. It came out in a black blur. He fired only once, hitting the woman in the center of the forehead. A small, perfectly round entrance wound appeared like magic. Her head jerked back, her hands clenching into fists. Her naked, battered body fell backwards as if in slow motion. She lay there, bleeding and twitching on the floor, her fingernails and lips turning blue. I heard a lighter flick and saw Aurora nonchalantly filling up the massive 4-foot-tall glass bung. Davy's small body stumbled across the room toward me, tears and snot streaming from his tiny, pinched face. I ran toward him, picking him up and hugging him. I felt the warmth radiating off of him as his arms closed around my neck. Turning, I decided I needed to leave immediately. I started heading toward the door without a word, but Llama stepped in front of it, his emerald eyes flashing with excitement and pleasure. And just where the fuck do you think you're going? He asked, a Cheshire cat grin splitting his bearded face. He ran his fingers through his fire-red hair, looking as calm and collected as a Buddha. Don't you want to see your brother? No, I think I'm good, I stuttered nervously. Llama put the hand with the pistol in it around my neck, leaning on me like an old friend. He's here, you know, he whispered in a conspiratorial voice. He wants to see you, too. We can't let you leave until you see Lee, Hope said from behind me. She had crept up on me, and her voice was only inches away. I saw her holding a long, serrated knife covered with dark crimson stains by her side. The handle looked sticky with gore. Why did you kill that girl? I whispered, feeling Davy's rapid heartbeat beating through his shirt. I cradled my son in my arms protectively, but I was surrounded on all sides, the only exit blocked. Lama shook his head, looking like a disappointed parent. She tried to escape and tell others about us, he said. The world is not ready for us yet. Mother God has not awoken. We try to be compassionate here. If anyone tries to escape, they go to the learning room, where they can be taught anew. She was worthless anyway, Hope spat with hatred, prodding the still corpse of the naked woman with one shoe. Always complaining about how much she missed her family. This is our family now. The intergalactic family of love. Her eyes shone with fanaticism. Do you want to see the learning room? Lama asked coldly. Is Lee down there? I said. Lama shrugged. Why don't we go see for ourselves, he asked in response, jamming the barrel of the pistol into my stomach. Davy's crying had quieted to a soft whimpering. Carrying my son in my hands, I turned and walked across the room towards the stairs to the basement. The steps looked dank and wet, flat slabs of concrete descending into a dark pit. Lama followed close behind me as our steps echoed off the gray walls. I was surprised at just how deep this building went. We went down at least a couple stories in the claustrophobic concrete tunnel. At the bottom, I beheld a nightmarish scene. A single flickering incandescent bulb overhead cast the dungeon in a dim light. A naked man was tied in the center of the room, his arms held straight up above his bowed head with knots of thick, brown rope. Deep, infected slashes ran across his back, the wounds suppurating and spreading in black patches. His entire body appeared like a roadmap of torture marks, bruises and clotted pus. All around the concrete walls of the room, someone had glued thousands of dismembered eyeballs. Most of them looked like they came from animals, but not all. Many were no more than rotting drippings of vitreous fluid and gore, yet others looked fresh. The smell of septic shock and decomposition hung thick and rank in the air, and I realized that not all the fetid odors in the house had come from the corpse of Mother God. From a dark corner, a silhouette stepped forward. I saw the form of my brother, his dark eyes blazing. He looked totally unharmed. He gave me a crooked half-smile. Lee. Holy shit. You're okay. I said, surprised. He nodded patiently. Father God is in charge of the learning room, Lama said. I looked between him and Lee, confused. Then the realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. You're not being held prisoner here? I asked, a rising sense of horror gripping my heart with a suffocating strength. Lama laughed at that, a sardonic, low chuckle of mirth and sadism that echoed through the room. The torture victim stirred, raising his bloody head slowly. I saw one of his eyes had swollen shut. Blood dribbled from a purple lump the size of an orange. His other eye opened, looking watery and unfocused. Help me, he whispered in a voice choked with pain. Lee stepped forward. In a flash, he struck out at the bound man, bringing a fist up into his jaw. I heard a crack of bone as a tooth flew out of his bloody, swollen mouth. Stop it. What the hell are you doing? I asked, still holding Davy in my arms. Davy hid his face into my chest, not looking at the torture and dismemberment surrounding us on all sides like a tomb. He tried to sell us out to the men in black. Lee said, pointing an accusing finger at the naked man as he spat blood on the cold concrete floor. We caught him talking to them. What the hell are men in black? I asked. Lee looked hard at me. We don't really know. They keep showing up here in flashy, colorful cars. They always wear sunglasses to cover their bulging eyes. Sometimes they have extra fingers, and they're always long and twisted. They say they're from the US government, but they don't look like government agents to me. They wear garish ties and colorful hats that no CIA agent would be walking around in, Lee said grimly. Since Mother God went into stasis, I've been leading the group. Before she fell asleep, we were interconnected souls. We think the men in black are sent from the Illuminati, Lama said from behind me. The naked man just shook his head, fresh streams of scarlet dribbling down his chin. I never talked, the man whispered. Father God caught you red-handed. Lama screamed in fury. Lee looked like he would strike the man again, his dark eyes narrowing to slits, but at that moment, Hope ran down the cold, concrete steps, waving her hands with manic energy. "They're back. They're at the front door, and they want to see you," Hope cried, looking at Lee for guidance. Lee's face went pale, his eyes widening. The three of them ran upstairs, leaving me alone with the naked man in the room full of rotting eyeballs. "Arm yourselves," I heard Lee scream overhead, the words echoing down the cold steps. I glanced back at the naked man, who was hanging unconscious again, the weight of his body dragging painfully against his arms. The sound of shooting reverberated from upstairs in a deafening series of bangs. Someone started screaming in pain. "They're coming in," I heard Lee yell, his voice tinged with a kind of fear I had never heard there before. I ran upstairs, taking the cement steps 2 at a time, eager to get out of the learning room and out of this house of such madness. I slammed through the door, sending it smacking against the wall with a clatter. The smell of blood and gunsmoke hung thick in the air, mixing with the omnipresent odor of death that permeated the house. Aurora was laying sprawled in front of the threshold, half of her face blown away and charred to a smoking heap of burnt flesh. It didn't look like the work of any bullet. A spreading puddle of blood wreathed her head like the halo. Llama lay in the corner, half of his chest blackened and exposed. His face was a mask of sweat. His clothes had melted to his skin. With wide, unbelieving eyes, he gurgled, rasping and suffocating. The smell of cooked human flesh and burnt hair hung thick in the air. I thought I could see his heart beating through the blackened gore of his torso. The rest of the cultists lay dead or dying. I saw the children gathered together in a corner, hugging each other, their faces pale. Their cries mixed with the gurgling of the dying. The front door stood wide open, letting the bright light stream in from the dirt parking lot. Silhouetted in the center of this effulgence stood the silhouette of a tall man in a suit. I felt like I couldn't focus on him, as if the lights grew brighter if I tried to look in that direction. He stopped into the room, causing his features to come into focus. It seemed the spell had broken as quickly as it had started. 2 more men in black suits followed him a moment later. At first glance, they seemed normal enough from a distance, anyways. And yet, my horror grew as I stared closely at the newcomers. Their faces looked as smooth and perfect as a glass pane. They each had a pair of expensive, black sunglasses. All of the hair on their bodies appeared to be missing, even their eyebrows. They all wore brightly colored, garish ties and undershirts that didn't match their black suits at all. They had no lips. Instead, they looked like they had drawn a crude facsimile of them with blood-red lipstick. Their fingers were long and twisted, looking as if they had far too many joints. Each tapered into points. I realized with increasing unease that they had no fingernails, no lines on their palms. Like their faces, their hands almost looked as if they were made of white marble, free from all lines and imperfections, gleaming with an inhuman smoothness. The man in the front removed his sunglasses. I saw his eyes were alien, monstrous things. They bulged from their sockets, the membranes looking as tight as a snare drum and ready to burst. Long, slitted black pupils ringed by irises the sickly yellow of a suppurating wound stared out at me. "Are you with these humans?" he hissed in a low voice that seemed to split and distort. "Are you a follower of the one they call Mother God?" "No. We're innocent," I pleaded. "I have no idea what's going on here." Davy wailed in my arms, his small face pinched with terror. The man in black put a long, gnarled finger on Davy's forehead. The boy instantly went silent, his eyes suddenly taking on a faraway, glazed look. "That is certainly fortuitous," their leader gurgled. "For Mother God was a thief, stealing our secrets. Thankfully, most humans will regard her as insane and rambling, but we can never be too careful, can we? Not with secrets." The S sound of the last word dragged on until it exploded into a reptilian hissing. I realized all 3 of the men in black had their smooth, marble-white jaws hanging open. Serpentine tongues flicked out as they hissed in unison. I backpedaled away in terror, seeing the back door of the cabin standing open. The corpses of the cultists littered the floor all around me, puddles of blood spreading under their slowly cooling bodies. In the corner, Llama still twitched, his bloody face a mask of confusion and agony. "I'm not involved in this," I said to the leader, hugging my son tightly. "I didn't shoot at you guys when you came in. I just came here to check on someone, but he's dead now, so you are involved," the leader said. "You've seen too much." He had his small, toy-like ray gun by his side. It looked like it was made out of some gleaming silvery material that constantly shone with an inner light. "Put the child down in the corner with the others," he demanded. I just shook my head. "We will not harm the children. These are too young to speak or understand anyway." The two men in black behind the leader stepped forward, raising their small, toy-like guns at me. I trembled inwardly. The leader came forward, looking as if he would rip Davy right out of my arms. But, at that moment, chaos broke out. I saw a blur of sudden movement from the corner. Llama's dying, glazed eyes glittered with an ineffable surge of joy and fanaticism. Crawling forward towards the men in black, I saw he had a pistol in one trembling hand. I tried not to look, staring into the leader's reptilian eyes instead. Okay, I said slowly, pretending to put Davy down. At that moment, a series of gunshots rang out, deafening in the enclosed room. The men in black all spun towards Llama, seeing his mutilated, bleeding form only 9 or 10 feet away. Llama's bullets hit the leader in the neck, causing a waterfall of blood to surge down the leader's garish clothing. But it wasn't any sort of blood I had ever seen before. It was as pale and white as the men in black skin, filled with what looked like tiny pieces of opalescent glitter. The other two instantly responded by firing their alien pistols back at Llama, sending orbs of cyclonic fire ripping through the air with the smell of ozone and smoke. I took the opportunity to flee towards the back door. The sounds of the gunshots and the eerie keening of the fireballs followed me all the way to my car. Parked next to me was the car the men in black had come in, a garish, bright orange VW Bug with federal plates on it. I flung open the door to my car, quickly put Davy in the passenger seat and rummaged in the glove box for my knife. I heard it click open. The house had gone silent by now. Knowing I was out of time, I ran toward the VW Bug, stabbing at the two tires on the driver's side. I heard the hissing of air as they quickly started deflating. I hopped in my car, hearing the doors slam open behind me. Two of the men in black ran out, shooting balls of fire at my car. I heard one ping loudly against the truck, sending the car fishtailing wildly. Davy screamed in terror, certainly traumatized by this horrid experience. After nearly crashing, I managed to right the car. Putting the accelerator down as far as it would go, I fled that place of nightmares, seeing balls of fire smashing the trees all around me as I went. Story: a run-of-the-mill horror story. Lester and his wife of 10 years, Emily, recently moved into a very large Victorian house in rural Maine. Their marriage had been ripped to shreds by the death of their 5-year-old son, and while they loved each other, they had not been coping well. Lester developed an anger problem, while Emily drank a bottle of wine every night. Seemingly everything reminded them of their late son, and Emily had bad dreams every night about the moment she saw her boy being hit by a pickup truck driven by a bigoted man in his 40s. One night, Lester found himself unable to sleep, and wound up sitting on the edge of his bed staring into the wall as if something was about to crawl out of it. Emily could not sleep either, but she remained lying on her side with her eyes half open. "Lester, what are you doing?" "It's 2 a.m. Lester groaned and lit up a cigarette. "I can't sleep. I keep thinking about what went wrong with our Toby. I couldn't run fast enough, despite going on 4-mile runs every morning." Emily sat up and stared at her husband. "Why are you smoking?" "Because I have writer's block," Lester barked. "I am a somewhat recognizable novelist who publishes a whole book every 7 years, but these days, I can hardly string together a few sentences. Trust me, I know all about disappointment. As a stay-at-home painter, I sell 1 piece a month, and I have depression. Still, we can afford this beautiful home," so why their conversation was promptly cut off by a loud thud coming from the hallway. They looked up in silence before another thud rang out. Lester put on his slippers and bolted towards the door. "What are you doing?" asked Emily. "What do you think?" "I'm going to go see what that sound was." He almost went to the closet for his gun, but then he realized that a weapon would not be conceivably useful in that sort of situation. He figured that if there was something out there, he could yell loud enough for it to run away. So, he simply cleared his mind and exited the room. Lester stepped carefully down the hallway before noticing that a door to his right was open. He knew he closed that door before going to bed, so he thought this was strange. Still, without a second thought, he entered the room and closed the door behind him. The room was pitch black, but he did not think to turn on the lights. Instead, he retrieved a cigarette lighter from the pocket of his sweatpants and flicked it on. From the other end of the room, he heard a faint growling sound. He thought that it must be a dog that the previous homeowners left behind, so he approached it without hesitation. With each step, the growling got louder and louder, but this did not deter him. He thought this dog must have been starving, so he bravely pushed on. When he got closer, lightning flashed and he could not believe what was illuminated. It was not a dog at all, but rather, an alien. He realized that this made a lot of sense in that it did not really need to make sense. It was an alien, so that was all he needed to know. The alien reached out and both of them disappeared. The next morning, Emily decided to move back to New York City. She did not attempt to sell the house nor pack any of her things. She just got in her modest sedan and drove away, crying as the trees passed by. Bye and see you again in the next videos and stories.